Man, that's a groovy tune. I like that one. I think that should be our new huge.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay, sure. If you say so.
anyways, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. It is Tuesday, which means it's time for another After Hours episode. We're pretty pumped about this one. John, it's good to see you, my friend. How have you been?
I've been doing well. You stepped on your own prick there a little bit. You said that this was an After Hours episode, but let's just go ahead and call this one Weekly Whiskey. We'll do After Hours after the show. How's that?
Oh, shoot. Did I flub that? It is Weekly Whiskey.
Right.
Yeah. Man,
We'll
I'm in that After Hours state of mind.
Don't worry. We're going to get to After Hours. All right, pal.
Oh, man. I love it. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. I apologize. It is Weekly Whiskey, and I'm thankful to have you all. So if you're drinking something great, yeah, check out the Brain on Brad. Like, stay cool, honey bunny.
On Brad.
Man, that's a great flick for everyone who's seen it. But yeah, if you're drinking something great, go ahead and let us know in the chat. I promise that I have not been drinking it tonight, which means I have some great stuff to pour. I'm excited about. But first, let's talk a little bit about some Our Bourbon Barrel news. This week has been crazy for everyone who's been following along what's going on in Heaven Hill. Last night, we had our new riff, Diamond in the Riff, number 2 selection Zoom chat, which was kind of cool. We got a bunch of people in to talk about what they were getting out of it, what they liked. We talked a little bit about Diamond in the Riff 3, which we'll be picking on Thursday night right here on Weekly Whiskey, which is fun. And Thursday night, we will also have a Zoom for the Knob Creek selection we did called Course Marshal No for all of the fans of Holy Moly out there. That was a particularly fun one.
Which should be everybody, I assume, at this point.
Yeah, if you're not a Holy Moly fan, just like get out of here. Like, I don't want to.
Yeah, and then go watch it and then come back here.
Yeah. I mean, it'll only take you a couple days. You'll get all the best stuff, but we'll do some more Knob Creek, maybe a little more Holy Moly theme going on. And I'm excited to say that there will be an Our Bourbon single barrel proof Elijah Craig in the works. So that is happening this year, which I am pretty stoked about. Next Monday, we'll also pick a Starlight barrel, and who knows what we'll do after that. Things are crazy. They're stacking up.
Yeah,
But
a lot going on. I mean, choosing barrels, tasting barrels live on Zoom or on here, or however we're going to live stream these. So really kind of tying in the community to the barrel selections too. We're not just picking these barrels and shoving them down everybody's collective throat. We're kind of expanding the audience here a little bit. I think it should be pretty fun.
yeah, and if the rumors are to be believed, the week following we will be doing some barrel selections with members of the community as well. So we'll see some new faces, we'll see some old faces. We've got a whole lot of barrel to pick, which I'm stoked about. So yeah,
Yep, we've got a lot coming your way.
it takes a village. But what do you say? Should we dive in? What are we talking about tonight, John?
Yeah, man. So tonight, let's take a step back, kind of. We do a lot of interviewing, as we just spoke about, a lot of barrel selections and tastings and things like that. But dialing it back a little bit, I want to kind of talk about what would be sort of not necessarily a bourbon 101, but the step that you make in your bourbon journey, where you go from a bourbon drinker to a bourbon taster, or a whiskey taster, or whatever type of spirits taster you choose to be. So how you progress along that journey and some of the steps that you might find yourself taking. For me, I could kind of break it down, but I want to kind of go into the different things that could be. And there's a lot of facets to it. And you may or may not find yourself as somebody who just wants to have their whiskey their way. And that may always be the case, which is great, which really you should do that. But if you find that path is kind of expanding and opening more doors for you, this is the discussion that you're going to want to tune into.
Yeah, definitely. I noticed that a lot of people, they ask us through Weekly Whiskey. They ask me personally, and they're like, I've been drinking whiskey for a long time, but I don't really, I can't get any notes out of it. I'm not really. Everyone says like, I don't have a great palate. And I'm like, I'm sure you actually probably do. You just haven't thought about trying to work on those skills. And they ask me like, well, okay, how do I taste whiskey instead of just slugging it back and moving on to the next bottle. So I think it's overdue. I don't think we've talked about something quite like this in a long time, and I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great topic.
Yeah. I mean, we've done blind tastings and kind of walking our way through them, but without the context, I think. So, we are lobbing these things to the guys who are already maybe thinking of themselves as more of a taster than a drinker. Somebody who is already kind of diving into the whiskey geek world, or maybe somebody who dove in years ago and they just want to catch some more whiskey content. So dialing it back a couple steps, we could sort of talk about the things like, let's dial it back a decade or so. Well, maybe not quite that for all of us, but let's dial it back to when we are beginning our bourbon journeys collectively. For me, a lot of those early days included the Old Faithful rocks glass, in which I would put some ice cubes and I would put some whiskey and combine those two things together and have myself a drink. Boom. You are now a whiskey drinker, right?
Yeah, bingo.
You have achieved it. I mean, you are either putting ice, water, Coke, whatever you may want to put in there alongside your whiskey. And you start mixing these things together, having yourself a drink, maybe two drinks, whatever. And that sort of opens up some doors for you. And for plenty of people, that's it. That's where they want to be. They like it. They don't need to expand on there, and that's great. But for me, the next step was, well, I mean, I've done this for a while. I really like the flavors. I like the things that are going on in the glass. I like the ability to sort of so taking a half step back here, when you're hanging out with your buddies and you're drinking a bunch of beers or something, or other drinks or whatever it is, I feel like sometimes it can kind of sneak up on you. It being how hammered you get. You go to the barbecue and you drink 12 Heinekens, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, I'm pretty drunk. Whoops. But with bourbon, I feel like you could really kind of control that throttle a little bit more. I mean, if you're going to pour that bottle another 2 times in a row, where you're going to be. So you can kind of sip it as you go and control it and just kind of, I think, ease the throttle a little bit more. Jumping back that half step that we just took, I like to think of my progression a lot of times moves from the glass. So from your standard glass to what I consider to be a proper tasting glass, Glencairn. Precisely. So for me, that is kind of step one. You've made a conscious decision. You want to do more than just drink the whiskey. You're curious about exploring some of the flavor profiles, or you want to dig into it a little bit more. You want to be a little bit more serious with it. Maybe it's more of a hobby than just a drink. And that's kind of my step one. And I'm going to throw it over to you and see where you're at with that.
Yeah, I think that you led with a really great point there, right? Where it's and this happens too. Like some days, all I want is a Heineken or like a Miller Lite here in the Midwest, as we would enjoy. And though, like, I love drinking Miller Lite, but I don't like think about drinking Miller. Like Miller Lite's something I have in my hand while I'm doing something, and I think that brings a really good point, which is mindfulness, right? Like when you decide, like, hey, I want to be a taster. Like you're really deciding, like, hey, I should focus on what I'm drinking. And if I'm at a barbecue, like I'm probably not holding a Glencairn with bourbon. I'm probably holding a Miller Lite.
Right.
You know, because I just want something to drink while I'm doing something else. I'm talking to people. I'm not trying to, I mean, not that Miller Lite is loaded with layers and really interesting things to pick apart, but like it's delicious. It's refreshing. I'll probably drink a bunch of them. I'm not really thinking about it. But yeah, I think having a proper nosing glass is a really great first step because that really assists you. Like that gives you the best tools in your kit, especially when you're working on your palate. But you know, it's very clear when you decide that like, you know, I just pound a bunch of bourbon. I really want to think about it. Is you're choosing to think of mindfulness. Like you're choosing like, hey, maybe I want to think a little bit more, and that opens up your brain to all sorts of different ways to enjoy whiskey because you're actually starting to think about it. So that's kind of where you know, the step one is deciding to transition from I drink a lot of bourbon to, you know, hey, you know, I want to pour this glass and think about it for a while. And, you know, one glass may last you 20 minutes. It may last you an hour. It may last you 2 hours. It may last you 1 minute if it's been like a weird day, but hopefully not. Because if you're thinking about it, like it takes a little while, and that kind of helps with your consumption too. Like if you're sitting down and have a couple drams and really think about it, I think you'll find that 3 hours later, you haven't gone through, you know, a quarter bottle of whiskey. Maybe you have,
right?
But
no, totally. That makes good sense. And the way you worded that actually dovetails nicely into sort of my step two. I don't know why I'm doing this in steps, but in my mind,
it's good.
I sort of had this like progression laid out of whiskey. Oh shit! I just realized that I cocked up the banner something fierce too. I have it backwards on there. I'm going to go ahead and fix that. But as you go from a drinker to a taster, updating here on the fly.
Yeah, I feel like we should have made like a timeline so we could flash up like XKCD has some really amazing timelines that are kind of humorous and stuff. But like, you know, it kind of does happen in steps. Like no one wakes up one day and says, I'm going to be a whiskey taster and then takes step one and immediately arrives.
Today's the day. I already know what the step is, so all I got to do is take it. I heard this idiot online say so.
Yeah.
I got to throw out my rocks glasses.
Yeah, and like don't get frustrated when you don't go from drinker to taster in 30 seconds. Like there's multiple steps. Like it takes some time. And
exactly,
you know, take them as you get ready for them. Yeah,
right.
It totally is a journey.
Yeah. So tying into what you were speaking about on how you need to think about it, my second step in this nonsensical progression is taking notes, thinking about it, and articulating what's going on. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to sit down with a notepad and scrawl out the exact things that you think you're tasting. It could be something as simple as, and I've done this with buddies before, especially folks who say, I just don't get that. Like, I don't have a good palate like you do, or I can't pick out tasting notes in whiskey. You can, because you taste something when you drink it. Whether that is as simple as it's sweet and I like it, or it's savory and I like it, or I just like it. You're starting with something. So taking notes is sort of that progression. So a lot of times what I'll do with buddies who sort of feel as though, whether it's just an intimidation factor of not being comfortable, or they just don't have their mind wrapped around it yet, just sit down and talk about it. Here's a pour of whiskey. We'll have the same thing. We'll talk about it as we go through. Hey, to me, there's sort of a banana nut bread thing going on with some brown sugar, like, and then some of it's going to be power suggestion.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But you will also be tying into some of those neurological pathways of, oh, I've tasted this before. I remember what that is. This pops up in my mind when I sip this. And then that connection is made. And once you've done it once, it becomes easier. It's like, oh, geez, I do remember it. Like, and then you go back to that same bottle. So moving right straight into step 3 is tasting something consistently. it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be a brand whore. You don't have to go, you know, attach yourself to one thing and only buy whatever it is. But I think starting out with something like, just to pick a brand, Jim Beam Black, something that's going to be extremely consistent. You could buy it today or 4 months from now or another 8 months
Any
from
day.
now, and it's almost exactly the damn same. For that, I've stolen this right from Fred, and it's Evan Williams Black, just because it's dirt cheap and it's always good. So something that's super, super consistent, and just go back to it 3, 4, 5 times. Try it. It doesn't have to be the thing that you drink always, but keep going back to it and comparing those notes that you've been taking and expressing and talking about. And that, I think, really kind of helps reaffirm to yourself, like, oh yeah, okay, I know what this tastes like. I know the things that this tastes like to me. I must be tasting the whiskey.
Yeah, I think that, and that hits on a point that I am super passionate about, is like, even before you get to the note stage, like I find that there's kind of a big gap between like when you decide to be mindful of what you're drinking and when you start putting down notes. Like, even if you just sit down with something, like try and talk about at least one thing that you like about it and one thing you don't like about it. And that's a really great way to hone in on, like, multiple whiskeys have had this thing that I just didn't love. And it's like getting it in your mind to think about it over and over. And once it's kind of in your mind, like you'll work through it and you'll figure it out. But hey, like I tried Maker's Mark and it was super sweet. I really liked that, but also it kind of tasted watery. I didn't love that. Like that's great. Like, you're kind of working into the things you like about the bourbon, but maybe you want something that's a little bit higher proof. Or if you say, this one was really peppery, I didn't super love it, but it had some other character, like it tasted kind of woody, like the mouthfeel felt great. Like that's kind of helping you go back, and as you revisit those bottles, you can kind of see like, well, maybe that one day I just felt kind of different. I'm like, I like these things about this bourbon all the time. And I think that Evan Williams Black is a great place to start, because you can also, like, within the Evan Williams family, like you can spend a little bit more money each time and like see if that improves things. Like, is Evan William white label a lot better for a couple bucks more? Like, do you enjoy Evan Williams single barrel? And like those are all pretty affordable still. So even if you drop $100, you get to try maybe 4 different expressions and kind of get your
Shit,
thoughts.
yeah, I bet you could get into at least 4 for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they like come in small form factors and
Right.
minis and stuff, which is cool. And the more you think about those things, like I think you'll be surprised at how many notes start to naturally pop up, not by suggestion appears around you, but you're like, you know what, I keep tasting this thing over and over. And I had a meal a couple weeks ago, we had some pie, or like we had this cocoa dessert, and like this reminds me of that. So like returning to bottles, I think, is really smart because it helps give you a baseline every single time, especially when you're new. Like you need, it's practice. Like it sounds
Yeah.
kind of like silly adult thing. Like I should practice my bourbon drinking, but like it's totally true. Like you got to practice.
Right.
Like if you want to become, work on your tasting, no one got to be a great taster by tasting like 2 bottles and then being like, yep, I get it all. Like you got to taste a lot
Right.
of stuff, which is a good problem to have, at least in my opinion.
Totally. So I think we definitely hit a good point in that consistency and coming back to something is important. Almost as important, I think, is variety.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that means going down to your local store and buying 6 or 7 different 50 ml bottles, get yourself a little Wild Turkey, Jim Beam, Evan, Jack, like get one of everything if you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And this is especially helpful, I think, for folks who feel like they don't get tasting notes or that they just can't tell the difference. Like if it's bourbon, it's bourbon. And look, I've been that guy. I mean, a dozen years ago, it didn't matter to me. Like when we would be out for dinner or drinks or something, it would be like, I'll have a bourbon. I don't care what it is. Like,
Yeah.
I know I like bourbon, so send me one and I'll be happy. And having variety in that, I mean, I would always have anywhere from 1 to 3 to 4 bottles on hand. Like,
Sure.
never anything crazy. I mean, we're talking like Evan Williams Black, of course, Benchmark, and one of the Beam products, whether it was a white or black label.
Okay.
And then every now and then I get something squirrely in there, like a Jefferson or like whatever, just kind of like I hadn't tried it or like pops out into me. And then just doing that, I sort of accidentally fell into realizing like, oh, hey, I think I like this one better than that one.
Yeah.
And just like you said, these are the things I like. These are the things I don't like about it. Now, knowing that, when I try one of these at a bar someplace, I could be like, "Oh, okay, I liked that one because of this."
Sure.
And that helps build that little, small portfolio in your mind of, "These are the things I like." And without realizing it, eventually, you're starting to build this, like, dictionary in your mind of definitions of flavors that you like in the whiskey. And as you grow that way, I think it really expands quickly. And then
Yeah.
before
Oh.
you know it, you're, buying crazy tasting glasses and shit.
No, that's perfect. I think, and this will touch on. I've always thought very strongly about this. Like the biggest mistake that I think you can make when you're working through this process, I see people do it all the time. Is they wake up and they say, you know what, I'm getting better tasting, or I want to become a taster, or I just want to think more about tasting, and they go out and they buy like 14 random bottles. They spend like $1,000.
Mm,
You buy just this huge spread of bottles. There's no rhyme or reason. And then they always post Facebook and ask like, well, how'd I do? And, I don't know anything about any of these bottles. What flavors am I going to get? I'm like, take this slowly. Like we only have so much money as people, start to, okay, I like this about this one. I didn't like this about that one. Maybe I tried it at a bar. Now I want a bottle. But if you just kind of throw a blind net and just buy a bunch of random stuff because it looks interesting, it's kind of overwhelming to then have to like taste through each of those and try and figure out like, you know, do I know the provenance of what this even is? Do I know where it came from? Do I know who's distilled by? Also, like the flavors are hard. Okay, now I have to move on to the next bottle. It becomes like kind of an overwhelming wave of just uncertainty. Like pick a couple bottles, figure out which ones you like, maybe grab another one, try something at a bar, and like it's a marathon. It's not a journey. And like
yeah, what's a bar? Seriously.
man, it's been a while since I've been in a bar, but
Yeah.
COVID, God, I hope that in a couple of months we talk about it like it's in the past, hopefully, because the bar is like the best thing you can do for trying tons of whiskey or splitting bottles with friends or doing samplers or virtual tastings. But
I feel like
variety is good, but don't overwhelm yourself.
yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point. Again, back to the form factor of the bottles. I mean, like buying 50 mils. There's a lot of places now that'll do like to go samples. That bar that you can't go sit at and have a drink might be able
Yeah.
to sell you 1 or 2 ounce samples of stuff like, pick an occasion. St. Patty's is coming up. You got plenty of like small holidays you could turn into big holidays. Fuck, if it's a fun Friday night, go get yourself 3 or 4 different pours of something you've never had before and try them out. I mean, there's ways to spend roughly the same money as going to the liquor store and buying 2 bottles you don't know about and get a little bit more experience that way too, which I think is super valuable as you are earlier on, or even maybe feel as though you're well into your whiskey journey, but you just want to explore more and learn more.
Yeah,
I mean, you're going to teach
absolutely.
it to yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also too, sometimes you'll try something absolutely terrible at a bar, and then you'll be like, "I'm really glad I didn't like." I
Yep.
had Basil Hayden dark rye, I think, and I had a couple of sips, and the waiter came back and he's like, "Do you like it?" And I was like, "Honestly, no, this is terrible." And he was like, "Oh, do you want a refund?" I was like, "No, just let me buy something else. I just want to try
Yeah.
something else for like this is not good." And I'm glad I didn't spend $85 on a bottle.
Right.
I spent
Save
15
yourself a
bucks on a
whole
pour.
bunch of money on that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a great lesson learned. I'm just going to dig into a little bit of this real quick.
Yeah. So I think moving on to like, we tell people like, oh, how do you nose and taste? I'm really interested. I think we both taste pretty similarly. Like we have very different palates, and we agree on that.
Yep.
Probably more than we agree on anything else, which is kind of fun. But
True.
the humble Glencairn is like $8. Always, I like to buy them at Bed Bath and Beyond because you can use their super generous 20% off coupon, and they become like $5 glasses. You can buy like 10 of them, and they really are perfect for nosing. Like they have this really great shape to them. They get kind of narrow at the top to like concentrate those smells. And I think really the Glencairn and discretion are the best two tools that like a drinker can have. You
Yeah.
know, you don't have to like, and I'll say it. I mean, I don't have any of them around here. Like I own a lot of glassware, and some of them are kind of kooky and crazy. But really, if I could pick one glass on a desert island, it'd be a Glencairn, and that's all you need to
Same.
know. I
Yep.
think,
100% hands down.
yeah, and we've got some glassware episodes coming up, but you don't need to spend $100 on a glass and $1,000 on booze. Pick up a couple cheap bottles, get yourself some oven, black, some wild turkey, maybe some beam stuff, and a Glencairn and get to work. But it's a really great nosing glass.
Yeah, if you've got Amazon Prime and you're willing to spend in the neighborhood of 10 minutes hunting around in there, which, let's fucking face it, you already do probably, just poke around and find the Glencairn I think it's a 6-pack, is about the best bang for your buck. And I did all of the math on this once upon a time, like an embarrassing amount. But if you look through there, it comes out to $6 or just under $6 per glass. So you're talking like 36-ish bucks to get this thing shipped to your door within 2 days, give or take shipping. And then you've got 6 of them, because you're going to end up dropping one. Or you're going to end up putting them through the dishwasher and chipping 1 or 2 of them. Like, having 6 of these things, even though it might sound like a lot, just take 2 out of the box.
Yeah.
Hand wash them, get them ready to go. They put the box away, tuck it back in a cupboard or something, and just use 2 of them until you need to use more. Or if you want to pour out a flight, get 3, 4, 5 of them, whatever it is that you have to do. But I mean, there's not a real high entry barrier to tasting some of these things. So, I mean, back to what I guess is my step 1 is, get into some proper glassware. Or if you already found yourself doing it, then you've already achieved step 1. So you're basically superhuman. Go ahead and scroll back through the video here, get yourselves into the other steps, and you'll be right on your way to tasting these things out. And just don't spend a ton of money on stuff just to have it. Because, I mean, fuck, Jay and I could tell you that having an absolute ton of whiskey doesn't make it easier.
Yeah. It almost makes it harder sometimes. I wonder what the hell I'm going to drink some nights.
There's a serious battle about that. I have people ask me occasionally, like, how do you decide what you're going to have? And it's like, well, I kind of go by the mood I'm in. Like, do I want something on that savory cornbread side? Do I want something that's a little bit sweeter? Do I want something a little spicier? I mean, but still, that only narrows it down so far. Ultimately, you just have to go with what you like.
Yeah. When you're like, oh, I'm feeling like brown sugar and honey, you're like, well, okay, now I have 100 bottles to work from.
Perfect. That narrows it down to half of the shelf.
Yeah, but the Aged North, I'm super excited. We get to cover that in an upcoming episode that John and I are working on.
We're going to hit up glassware very soon, and it's going to be, we'll do a full compare. Well, maybe not full compare. We'll do a good comparison, I should say, on glassware, the things we like.
Compare-a-palooza. Yeah.
Compare-a-palooza, as Yancey said here. They're pricey, but I'm telling you, man, some things are spendy and they're tough. These are spendy and they feel good.
Mm-hmm.
They have a great weight to them. So, I mean, I don't want to go too far into glassware now because that's not where we're aiming now, and I don't want to chew up too much over time. But
yeah, I mean,
Aged North stuff is good.
Start with a Glencairn, and honestly, too, there's no shame if you decide after a couple of weeks, months, you're like, you know what, I actually don't care about whiskey that much. I just want to buy something I love and a cocktail on the rocks. My rocks glass is fine. Like, don't let anybody tell you that, we all try stuff. Like, my fiance tried pottery, and after a couple of weeks, she's like, it was fun, but I'm not a potter. I'm finding some other hobby. And I tried tennis for a while, and I was like, tennis looks awesome. And after a couple of weeks, golf, I just like golf better. There's no shame. If you're not super into tasting after a while, like, don't make drinking whiskey work.
Right.
Keep it going if you enjoy it. But I'm like everyone else. Every January 1st, I buy a new box of Glencairns. My old ones, after a year of hard tasting and writing for Raiders and stuff, like, my glasses look just terrible.
Yeah, they get all bruised up and shitty. I mean, but when you're talking about a $6 piece of crystal, like, yeah, it's going to happen. And they're not expensive, and that's by design.
And that's the thing. Like, I picked my 6 grodiest looking Glencairns. I release them to the Goodwills, or I just toss them if they look terrible, and I went and bestow them on an enemy. And they're cheap enough. Like, I am always buying Glencairns. I'm buying other glasses too, but if I'm writing a review for Whiskey Raiders or for a competition or something, like, there's a Glencairn in my hand, and that to me is it's the only glass you need. You can want other glasses, but the Glencairn is the only whiskey glass that I think you really need.
Fair.
So that's kind of where I'm at with it, and the rest kind of comes with it. But don't give yourselves the tools for success. I think a Glencairn makes a lot more difference than people realize. And trying to stuff your schnoz in a rocks glass and get big notes is a little bit tougher than a lot of people realize. Like, they make a big difference. You,
a few things now that I'm a total ball bag and all I do is taste out of glassware that I choose is like in those rare occasions that you end up at a restaurant or a bar, you're like, oh, you know what? I could go for a little pour of whiskey.
Oh, yeah.
And it shows up in a big old neat glass or rocks glass. And I'm just like, man, that's frustrating. What's more frustrating to me is when you sit down at the bar and you ask them to put it in a Glencairn and they look at you like, a what?
And you're like, oh, man.
I'm like, fuck, never mind. Do I really want to spend $19 on that pour of Bookus now? I mean,
dude, I got bourbon served to me once in a martini glass. I was like, this is the complete opposite of it. Like,
wow.
A rocks glass, like, and I asked, like, can I have a rocks glass? And they're like, yeah, what do you want? And I like took the martini glass and I poured it, okay, like the rocks glass
now.
was an improvement, but I just kind of looked around like, did someone order whiskey? And oh, nope, that was meant for me.
Yeah, this, you actually brought this to me on purpose. Okay, cool. Yep, here we are. This is real life. Let's run it.
Which is cool. Like, I'm not a dick at bars, but like drinking out of a martini glass is already like extremely hard. Like, not even a sober person can drink a martini out of a martini glass and not spill a drop. And like,
no, absolutely not. That's why I don't order those things. I wear half of it.
And you can't nose whiskey out of them. But I mean, that's often its own form of weed. It's like, yeah, rocks glass, Glencairn. If your bar has a Glencairn, man, you got a treasure, because that is not the norm.
No, it certainly is not. I was at a bar in Boston, would have been a couple of years back now, and I said it was a hotel bar where we were staying, and they had like a pretty massive selection of glassware, and it's like you could see like it ranged from wine glass down to whatever the hell type of crazy glass. And I was down in the hotel lobby waiting. My wife was getting ready. We were going to go to dinner. I was like, oh, it's perfect time. I'll just go grab a drink. I noticed that they had a bottle of Booker's that had just been opened, and I hadn't bought that batch. And I was like, well, I'll swing over and give that a whirl.
Sure.
So I grabbed myself a seat, and it was the same scenario. I was just like, could I get a pour of the Booker's, please, with Glencairn? And I was just kind of like, a what? A Glen what? And I was just like, how about that one? And I pointed out to a glass. It was like the most tulip shaped, like brandy snifter style glass they had. And he's like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And I was just like, man, this guy like looked like he knew what he was doing. It looked like a pro bartender, and they had a fuckload of glassware, but whatever, man.
Yeah,
you gotta pick your battles.
It's tough too. And like I'll never disparage a bar, but if they have the glassware and I'm like, can I have this? And they're like, I don't get it. I'm like, okay, like we got some complication here. But
yeah,
at the same time too, I've also been to a bar. My buddies and I talk about this every year when we meet up. It was a bar in Economowoc, Wisconsin, and it was Macallan 18. It was $14 a pour, and they poured like 4.5 ounces in a brandy snifter.
Whoa.
And we all got our first pour, and we looked around, and like everyone like mentally
communicated. Who's driving?
And was like, we should all Uber home after this, and we'll pick up our cars tomorrow. And then everyone just immediately ordered a second round, and like we cashed that bottle over the course of the night. Like we called them tanker pours, because the guy just like kept pouring, and he'd like look at you like for confirmation and be like
waiting for you to give him the, that's good.
Yeah, and everyone's eyebrows kind of like went up and up and up. We probably drank like $500 worth of Macallan that night, and like literally nobody could drive home. But it was totally worth it, because everyone had 9 ounces of Macallan 18 and spent $50 with tip, which is unheard of. But it was in these huge brandy snifters. I mean, I'll take it. Like I'll drink Macallan 18 out of that. Yeah, it was good.
Sure, why not? Worse things have happened to better people, haven't they?
And then a couple of weeks later, I paid $18 for a pour of Basil Hayden's dark rye, and kind of was like,
that you did. That fucking karma.
So yeah, karma works out. But we're kind of coming up at the end of time. I think we've covered like some of the biggest steps. I don't know if you have any tips that you actually enjoy for actually like nosing, writing down notes, and then maybe we'll kind of bring the ship around to port. But
okay,
I have some thoughts.
So all right, I don't know why I feel like I need to have my glass in hand to do it.
I did the same thing. I just reached for it.
I want to demonstrate as I dictate here. Okay, so for me, basically, I like to pour it. Sometimes I like to let it sit a little bit. I mean, if it's barrel proof, especially, I like to give it a minute. But really, my tasting process is as simple as, I'm noticing this glass is bruised up, as we were just talking about.
They all are.
My process is fairly simple. I like to pour it, let it sit a minute or so. If it's higher proof, let it sit a little longer. But the biggest thing is I really like to give it a good swirl, let it coat the side of the glass. For no other reason than my own enjoyment. I do like to look at the legs. I don't use it for any type of comparison or anything super in-depth that doesn't impact my scores, ratings, or tastings.
Yep.
But I do like to look just because I like to.
It's fun.
I smell once on each side. If I like, just to start out with my mouth open, a little smell from each nostril. I broke my nose enough times that I think it does make a good enough difference. So I like to do that, hit it a couple times on the nose. And if I'm tasting through a flight, I will nose them all first before I taste, just to pick up on the initial differences. And then for me, it's a quick, small taste, kind of hit the front of the palate. Move that through. And then I'll go back in for the nose as I'm kind of clearing through the palate. And that, to me, sort of reaffirms everything that I caught on the first smell, and then lets the rest of the aroma come through with the rest of the taste. And then I'll kind of move through my tasting. So as I'm doing that, I'm sort of making my initial notes of, okay, these are the things I smelled. And then the first taste isn't really like for notes. It's just sort of warm the palate to that pour. And I think I saw, might have been Freddie Johnson talk about this once upon a time, but just that initial small taste at first. But then I sort of nose as I, clear my palate and get the rest of that through. And for me, that sort of rounds out what is going to end up being the nose of that pour. So you get a little bit of everything kind of involved with it. And then I work through my tasting from there, small sip, work it through the palate slowly, kind of make sure you're hitting everywhere in your mouth with it. And then kind of make my notes as I go through. The finish for me is sort of something where I float around, like, if something's hanging out there more than 35, 40 seconds, that's a really long finish for me.
Okay.
So, I mean, especially if there's complexity. I mean, if it's just like kind of tingling in the mouth or tastes a little bit like oak, well, to me, the finish is sort of fallen off. It's still there, but it's not, gaining any more points at that point. So that's, I guess, the roughest form of my A to Z on what I would go through in a 1 to 1.5 ounce pour.
I like it. That actually, that's perfect. Like you covered a lot of the stuff that I really like. The one point that I add, you talked about nostril a little bit. Like, you do have a dominant nostril. Like, people smell better from one nostril to the other. So I always kind of like to go left to right. It's interesting. Like, your perception will change if your mouth is open or closed. And like, I don't like it. It'd be super pretentious to be like, left nostril, pancakes, right nostril, brown sugar, mouth open, right, oak, mouth. Like, I don't do that. Like, it's just part of the nosing experience. Like, I'm smelling, these are all the things I'm getting, mouth open, mouth closed. If you notice it changes a lot, then it's complex. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. But like, the last thing that there should be too is some like big ritualistic, preposterous, like, have fun with it. That's really it. Your notes hit on me. I like to take a little sip, take a couple bigger sips, kind of switch them around, see how it like rests on your palate. And the more time you spend, you'll pick up on those things. The first time you'll just notice, like, hey, this one actually tastes like rich and syrupy, and it made my cheeks tingle. And later on you'll be like, and it reminds me of maple syrup, and I'm starting to get like, wow, this one's so much woodier than other pours. And then like, hey, there's some oak structure here. And there's my biggest suggestion is to take your time with it. And when you notice things, like, write them down. If you're like, hey, this was totally different from some other time, like, try and dig into why that is, because everyone learns things at different speeds, just like everything else in life. And, at the end of the day, like, you get to drink whiskey and kind of, think about it. And I think that's a really good exercise for everyone. So I think your process is strong. I like it.
Perfect. I don't really have a whole lot to add to it other than I think this has been a pretty fun episode. I don't think we do. I don't know. I feel like there's times that I'm like, we don't do enough sort of like welcoming stuff or like one-on-one stuff, but it's like, I don't want to be condescending. I don't want to like take an audience of folks who know whiskey and talk to them as if they don't. I just want to be open enough to folks who might have these questions that we don't really have a great form for them to answer, or to ask rather.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we get a lot of questions on social media, individually, right, over email, that are just like, hey, how do you get better tasting? And I realized that we never wrote it down. Like, I'm always like I'm typing this new every time. Like I wish I had a template. So this is perfect, you know. If you know somebody who's interested in getting in whiskey, just send it off to them. Say, hey, these two doofuses I know like did the guide. Like they're not too bad at what they do. Like here you go. It makes it nice and easy. It's a good concise. If you've got 40 minutes to sit around and sniff whiskey, you've got 40 minutes to watch our, you know, going from bourbon drinker to bourbon taster guide. And I think it's super helpful for people.
Especially now that I switched around the banner so that it reads properly too.
It's funny because
we'll edit all that.
Yeah, we will fix that in post. Truly, we'll give it the after hours treatment.
Okay, fair enough. Wait, does that mean that you won't edit it and then somebody else will tell us that you didn't edit it?
Hey man, that's only happened twice. Okay,
good enough for me.
That could be my promise. It may happen twice, but it won't happen a third time.
All right, I'll take you up on it.
Oh man, I love it. Well, thank you everybody for joining us here tonight for Weekly Whiskey. We talked about you know, the transition from bourbon drinker to bourbon taster. You know, it's always good to get back to basics. It's fun, and a lot of people are curious about the basics. And you know, if they are, go ahead and share this episode with them. We would love to see more people be less intimidated by drinking whiskey, because a lot of people are like, you know what, it's pretentious, it's hard, I don't think it matters. You know, people are making stuff up, and I assure you it's not the case. So send this video their way. Let them know that things aren't that, you know, they're not that hard. Things are actually pretty easy. Step One by Glenn Cairn, but we digress. Send them this episode. If you're looking for more from John, you can find him at the Bourbon Finder. He is covering all sorts of whiskey all the time. He's on Instagram. You can find him there. You can find him at thebourbonfinder.com and here on Tuesdays and Thursdays as well. And I'm Jay. I'm from Whiskey Raiders. So we are the Rotten Tomatoes of whiskey. If you're looking for reviews, articles, we have some great opinion pieces coming up. We cover a lot of whiskey, especially now that it's Irish season. You know, there's a holiday coming up. So check us out at whiskeyraiders.com. And I think that wraps up the spiel. Hit us on Thursday. We have some barrel select stuff coming as well, which will be fun. But John, I enjoyed this episode. It was a blast.
Absolutely, buddy. We should do more of this.
Yeah, I totally agree. But thanks for joining us, everybody. We will catch you on Thursday morning for After Hours. And we hope you have a good evening, and cheers. Enjoy your whiskey.
Cheers, guys.